Hi, guys. Welcome to Real Food Recovery. We've got another fun episode today. But before I jump into that, how's it going, Jamie?
Good, good. Glad to be here. Interesting
Yeah,
topic today.
I know anytime we can talk about family stuff, things that happen in the home, I think touches everybody.
I
So
agree.
we are going to address ways to raise healthy eaters in our homes, whether your kids are toddlers or teenagers, and how we can help them guide them towards cleaner, non-processed foods without feeling like we're forcing it. And I'm doing forcing in air quotes for those of you that can't see me, but that is one thing you'll hear us talk about over and over today. The force equals resistance. So we're going to explore how we can make healthy eating enjoyable and educational at the same time, and especially for those who have been living with or recovering from ultra processed food habits, it lands differently on us, but in this process, it really helps to reinforce our own beliefs and habits.
Yeah, so that's key, right? Making transition feel natural to the children because honestly, forcing kids into a healthy eating routine can lead to resistance, frustration, and eating disorders.
Yeah,
Right? To be
that's
honest,
true.
the minute that you demonize something and give a sainthood to something else, you create a disconnection inside the child, and that disconnection can turn into self condemnation, which can turn into a disorder later on. So it's a very, very, very delicate topic
Mhm.
that we know. I think what we're talking about today is less about healthy eating and more about developing an internal compass in a child.
Yeah.
It's really because to focus on the other stuff can easily create an eating disorder. I've seen it happen in children in my own family.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but when my older daughter was in high school, she was a cheerleader, and I could see some of those around her that were already starting to, refuse the food, become I mean, really like too thin, things like that. So, no, I agree with you about that. The last thing we want to do is awaken that demon.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I sure wish I could sit here and tell you how I did it with my family, but I'm afraid I am really more of one of those cautionary tales because I sent my kids with sack lunches filled with the chips and the ho-hos and the Hawaiian punch many times because I didn't know any better, and everyone was thin at the time. I would line my lunch sacks up, 15 lunch sacks for the week, and I would put all that processed shelf stable food in their sacks, and it makes me sick to think of it. And I thought I was so cool because I was so efficient with having the lunch sacks lined up. And each morning I would add the turkey sandwich. So at least, they got a turkey sandwich in there. For some reason, I thought if I got that turkey sandwich in there, I was doing a really good job of creating health for my kids. But when I look back at that, and I feel sick over what I did, and I think my kids are doing a much better job than I ever did. Just the awareness, I think, is greater now. And so we're going to start with the basics on this one. And when it comes to introducing kids to cleaner, non-processed food, the first thing we have to do is set the right environment. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but it's so important. And we need to make the kitchen and food available to them feel inviting, not just healthy. For example, all my kids, everybody I know knows that I love the Cosmic Crisp apples. And so I always have those sliced up and ready, easy to grab. And now they like it too, and they know Grandma likes it. And we are really working hard on when we get together and have activities of swapping out these sugary candy sweets for. They really like the dehydrated fruit because it travels to, if we're at the park or wherever we're going, it's easy for them to just take a few pieces, and their taste buds are changing for that. You can get bananas, strawberries, apples, anything, and it's dehydrated or dried. I try to make sure it's not the kind with laced in sugar. Um, but meat sticks, they like the Chomps brand of meat sticks and some nuts. So I am working on just crowding out and starting to expose them to new things. And so far, they really seem to be going for it without much pushback. And Jamie, you've worked more with teenagers. How did you influence them? I'm really curious how, when you came into their lives, and this may touch a lot of people who are listening, blended families and coming into teenagers' lives, how do you, without force and just exposure,
I've
introduce?
made a lot of mistakes. I mean, I've had children or, nieces, nephews, and then our kids together, my husband and mine. But I've had, been aunt or godmom or babysitter to, every age of child. So for me, it's more about making sure that when I did make those mistakes, and I had to own the mistakes that I made, right? When I was going through my
Mhm.
own disordered eating phase, I would try to, push those choices onto my nieces or my nephew, thinking I was doing the right thing, but it really was, backfiring in a huge way. And I know that my certain beliefs and some of the things that I said when I was with them, even for short periods of time, contributed to some confusion for them. And of course, their parents and society took care of the rest, right? As far as created, their eating habits, good, bad, or otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Society and those day in, day out roles of parents really create eating habits in people and children. Um, but for what I know that I impacted, I certainly owned and apologized for, because I certainly, would try to push or explain to, especially one of my young nieces at the time, why she wanted to make a different choice. And it had nothing to do with her, the way she looked. One of my nieces has a genetic disorder, and
Mm,
it's nothing catastrophic. It's just something that she has basically an allergy to a certain type of macronutrient, and she really has to eat very specifically for it, before there was a medication for her genetic issue. So uh, I was trying to sort of help guide her, and it just was not the right thing, right place for me to be. So again, when I learned a good lesson, this was many years ago. I learned a good lesson, and learned that, with our kids, my stepchildren, I'm just observing. If I have them over, I make sure that I make a few things that they're asking for, or things that we know that they really like. But those things are usually vegetables or a particular kind of dinner dish. They don't really ask for anything ultra sweet, or ultra processed, except around the
mm,
holidays. Um,
mhm,
and at that point, we just accommodate whatever they're needing, because it's the one time a year around the holidays, or even on their birthday. Our oldest is in college, and he's in his early 20s now, so he doesn't really care about birthdays as much, as long as
mhm,
give him gas money. And our daughter, we take out for her birthday still, because she's local. So we do whatever she needs there, but she's noticing, the effects of the food supply on her body.
mhm,
Again, not
mhm,
not about weight, but just about her body not feeling and performing the way she wants it to.
mhm. Yeah,
So
no,
I don't really have to say much anymore.
no, that's great. I love that, but it sounds like there's no force involved in there, just education and example, which
No.
isn't the way we all respond best to.
Yes. Well, I do. Yes.
Yeah.
So again, when we think about, there's no, like, again, there's no rules. And when I had little ones, toddlers and young kids in my life on a regular basis that I saw many times a year, nieces and nephews, that was something that I had to learn to model only, and not to say a word
Yeah.
about what I was doing. Why, if they ask me a question, answer it, and keep it about me and not you or everyone. I had to learn that, this is what works for me, or this is how I feel my best. And if they share something, ask questions about what they're, and reward their self-awareness, reward their curiosity. And
Mhm.
that's it. Don't reward their food choice.
Yeah.
Reward their curiosity and reward their self-awareness about how that food makes them feel.
Love that point. Yeah, that's
It's a
huge.
big deal. It's a big deal. So, and especially I learned how to not, after overstepping my boundaries a couple of times, thank God, only a couple of times, I learned how to not overstep my boundaries. So I brought that with me when I became a stepmom.
Yeah. Oh, that's I've learned so much. I wish I'd had you in my life earlier on.
And don't beat yourself up for what you did as a mom when you were
Oh
trying to.
man, that was bad. That
You
was
were
really
doing
bad.
what everyone else was doing back then, by the way. Not like it was 80 years ago, by the way. You talk about it like it was 80 years ago. It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
that's how fast things have moved and changed. You didn't
yeah.
know back then.
And that's what I had for my lunch. I, right? I mean, that's what I took to lunch too, as a kid.
Yeah.
So, and I thought it was great.
But
So,
there's no shame, right? You were doing what you thought was best for your children at the time, based
yeah.
on what you knew in the world at that time. I mean, I think
y-
every parent, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago was doing that. Today, I might say that it's a little bit, the
Totally,
information's out there. But back,
totally.
10 years ago, even, no, it wasn't. Not as mainstream as it was today, is
I
today.
mean, I would go to Sam's or Costco and,
Yeah, of
buy
course.
the chips and the ho ho whatever in the bulk. And we just plowed right through that stuff. So,
Mhm.
anyway, this goes way beyond a conversation about just adding in fruits and vegetables because we're talking about getting kids involved in meal planning and cooking. A child is much more likely to eat a meal they help create, right? That makes sense. I know I would. So this is another epic fail for me. I did all the planning, shopping, preparing, and cleaning up. And I'm sure in a way it's just easier and faster because I had a company, I had, the 5 kids, I had laundry and we had sports and all that. And so I just had to keep things moving at rapid fire pace. And I just ran a very tight ship, super efficient with my systems. I had my systems in place and I did not take time to properly teach or train my children, but somehow they're all marvelous cooks and my son has a restaurant. So I have to say when I grew up, my mom also did all the meal planning, cooking, cleaning up as well. And I'm really curious to know if in your home when you grew up, if your mom, I know your mom was a school teacher and taught math like my mom
Mhm.
did, so they were working full time. So I'm just curious how your mom approached that with you, if you grew up with that exposure of helping or having assignments, or how did that work in your home?
Yeah, so that was part of my culture too. So, growing up in an Italian American household, that was just part of what you were taught as a young woman and a young girl. You were involved at a very early age in the food preparation and food sourcing and gardening and,
Oh,
all the things, all the things. I don't
mhm,
really remember the gardening as much as I remember the, very early age being on the stool next to grandma or mom at the sink or at
mhm,
the counter peeling
uh-huh.
or or organizing whatever I could organize at a young age. If I was given a knife or something, it was usually, scissors or something just to help cut things up. If I was too young to use a knife. And I remember being, brought into the setup and cleanup of all meals
Mhm.
at a young age. It was just what was taught to me, what was expected. But it created a lot of memories and created a lot of
Yeah.
bonding. There was a very intentional process of involving and then literally transferring the knowledge. So at a young age, it was when you learn to do this for your family, this is what you'll do. When
Yeah.
you do this for your family, this is how you're going to do it. It was very
Mhm.
intentional, the way things were passed on. When people, especially moms, grandmoms, my aunt passed away, there was never ever any talk of money or stuff. Maybe a wedding ring, right? Wondering where a wedding ring was or who, what that looked like. And I wear more in my grandmother's rings, but that wasn't the discussion about, after the passing, right? After the passing and the emotions, it was always where are the recipes, who's got the recipes, what are we doing
Yes.
with the recipes, how do they get passed out? Or is someone gonna digitize that? Like, what are we doing? That's a thing. It's a thing.
Mhm.
I remember the day, even my godmother and my mom's sister, who's sort of the last matriarch in the whole family, passed away last year. It was, well, one of her daughters said, "Don't worry, I have a recipe." So like that was, they were like, oh, we're like, oh, okay. Like, that was it, because it's a thing. It's a thing. Um, and it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily eating the stuff every day, but it's nice to know that the traditions are there. Um, and again, I think that it was for me growing up a very empowering place. It taught me a lot of confidence in the kitchen and a lot of ease in the kitchen. Um, and it was something that I felt very connected to my mom, my grandmothers, my aunts, my cousins. I felt very connected to them and to those processes every year. Unfortunately, growing up and through the years, especially really more in my 20s and 30s, my eating disorder was so advanced by then that I got to a point where I didn't want to participate in those memories. I
Oh.
could not separate my own stuff from those memories, and I really um wish I could have, because I missed out on a lot of those family things, because
Mhm.
I thought I couldn't be around that stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and again, it's when I got to be a stepmom, I immediately started to involve my stepdaughter into the cooking or trying to involve her. She had no interest. And I don't think
Oh.
there was nothing, personal. She had
Mhm.
interest, in engaging with me in other ways, but had no, it just because she was never involved as a child.
Mhm.
That was just
Mhm.
not anything she had any interest in because she was never involved as a child.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny that you mentioned about the recipes because when my husband's mother passed away, in that era, everybody hand wrote
Yep.
recipes. And so for much of my early first marriage life, every recipe you owned was on a 3x5
Yeah.
index card.
Yeah.
And if you were really swanky, you had what's the next, is the 4x6 the next bigger one, if you had that next big size. But I remember specifically when she passed away, there were several traditional dishes that she made. And that was the first thing that I wanted to make sure we kept of every treasure, just those
Yeah.
handwritten
Yeah.
recipe cards that I still have today. And now I've got my food blog, so everything's, on the computer, and nobody writes handwritten ones. But don't you remember your girlfriends giving you even handwritten recipe
Oh, yeah.
cards? And that's just so precious, just their handwriting and the tradition behind it. So
Well, and
anyway,
that's why I shared the story about when my aunt passed, because it was like,
yeah.
someone's got her recipes, okay, because it was all handwritten stuff, handwritten little cards that she collected over her 80
Mhm.
years plus.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do see my children involving their children in the kitchen a little more. And when you're talking about being on a stool, I remember my mom canning tomatoes. They would have gardens every once in a while. Both my parents grew up on farms, but I just remember that big canning process. Now I've never done that. That was almost dangerous work with
Yeah.
the whatever
Pressure
you put
cooker,
that.
yeah.
Yes, the pressure cooker and that whistle going off and things like that. So anyway, interesting stuff about generations past, but getting kids involved, I think, is just a huge compliment to health. And I think when we encourage kids to help in the kitchen, it taps into that natural curiosity and they start to see food as something they can experiment with. The idea is to foster an interest rather than fear or resistance. My grandkids, when they come over, they like to make sandwiches with cookie cutters, but they've got to make the
Mhm.
sandwich first and then stamp out a shape. And, that was a way to get them interested in a little bit of doing it on their own. So it's not about just you have to eat this or else. It's more like, hey, look at this colorful salad you just made. Isn't that fun? My kids were on their own for after school snacks because I was usually at work. And so often it was just a tortilla with cheese or refried beans heated in the microwave. And we always had the apples, yogurts, popcorn, cheese around. And I could have done a better job in this area. So, again, all of this is a great learning lesson for me as well. And I must have picked it up somewhere or they must have picked it up somewhere because I noticed them having conversation with their kids about the dyes and sugar and so my grandkids are having a much better start than I gave my kids. And I'm grateful it's just more of a conversation now, too, like we've talked about. I was talking to my friend yesterday, and she was sharing about how her adult son and daughter, that we have daddy-daughter dances here at the schools. And the son was telling my friend that there was nothing but just sugar there for the snacks. Literally everything was
Mm.
just heavy sugar And then you've got the drinks, the drinks to wash it down with that more sugar. And so, and she was shocked that he was aware, these are 30-year-olds that are really starting to pay attention. And yeah, it's just so much of a conversation now,
Yeah.
gratefully. So they're starting to notice it.
I agree. So, if we think about once we can get kids involved in food prep, how do we make the transition, to growing that? I would say that again, if you have a child that's been exposed to nothing but ultra processed food, a lot of it is
Yeah.
to make sure that, they don't, they're perfect. And I've done volunteering with children, where they have, maybe been, in a financial situation that they were living on food stamps. And they, as we unfortunately know, food stamps are, they're heavily subsidized by the processed food manufacturers. And it's really sad. So these kids have never known, there is food deserts exist. And even kids, I spent, 23 years in the Chicagoland area and living in Chicago for many of them. And, you're living next to or near or constantly volunteering with, in my case, kids at churches or kids in community centers that had never been exposed to any fresh food ever. So it was very, very critical for me to make sure that I was not being like, you don't know what this is, like I just, because
Yeah.
I was shocked like at first, and I had to be very mindful
Hmm.
because, unintentionally I could, or any volunteer could create shame for these kids.
Right.
Not because we ever wanted to, but because they really didn't know. They'd never seen a fresh fruit or vegetable back then. This was, not maybe 20 years ago now that I was doing that volunteering. And in college, I volunteered with, moms of, they were homeless moms and their infants and their young children. I would go and volunteer and help with the kids. And these were low income families that were, many of them were living on government assistance, had never seen fresh fruits and vegetables, as far as how it looked on their plate, right? They'd seen pictures and stories and pictures in books or on television.
Yeah.
They'd never
Yeah.
seen it, they'd never interacted with it, they'd never eaten them on a regular basis. And when they would react to it, or they would make a face, or they would push it away, my first thought would be to tell them what I was told, right? Which was usually something judgmental or something, best in intention, but was sort of, trying to get them to do something differently instead of rewarding them for noticing that it tasted different, or whatever, or being curious about why they were responding that way. I would try to just impart my agenda on them, which totally unintentionally, I'm sure I probably was bringing up a negative feeling in them. And so that I learned as I went through my volunteering process. And then as I became an aunt and, a godmom and all the things that I just had to learn, I need to be very careful about how I interact with a child about food, because how I was interacted with around food was extremely toxic and contributed deeply to my own eating disorder. So you have to be very, very careful.
Yeah. I on church last Sunday, this guy, he and his wife have adopted 4 kids, ages 12 to 17, siblings, not
Adopted
adopted.
them at age 12.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say adopted, fostering. They just started fostering them recently. They were all siblings, and so they took all 4. And he said we had only had them a couple weeks, and we had all the breakfast food, typical. We thought they were going to be thrilled with all this normal breakfast food. And one morning he came down, and one of the kids was had Tostitos on their plate with cheese sauce uh, poured all over it. And he said, it was just a reaction. I didn't think about it, but he said, that's not breakfast food. What are you doing eating that? And the look on that kid's face was just kind of like shock and horror, because this kid had, food insecurity for probably most of their life. And so probably was embarrassed and thought they were doing something wrong. And my friend said, I really had to apologize. I didn't even, why didn't I stop and think about their history, their background, what they've been through before I'm putting on him what my beliefs of what a typical breakfast food is.
Yeah,
They
it's
may
easy
not
to
have a
do.
typical, yes. Yeah.
It's
And
easy
he
to do.
did apologize
Yeah.
to that child. And, the kid said, it's okay. And he said, no, it wasn't okay. but I appreciate you being so forgiving so easily. But that brings us to a good point, and that is the idea of the slow swap. Because not if people are used to having a lot of these processed foods, just
Sure.
like us, nobody likes the big switcheroony, right? All at one time, nobody responds well for that. So maybe you don't throw out all the chips and cookies in one go. Instead, you start introducing these healthy or alternatives like we had talked about. Maybe try and find things that taste a little similar but are less processed. Things like the homemade baked sweet potato fries instead of regular fries, or making fruit smoothies with whole fruit instead of sugary juice. I bought some kale chips, and my grandkids, they love them. They have different spices on them, and they don't mind those at all. And actually, they like them, and they come in just little individual containers, and they usually take one home whenever they go home. I always have the apples, nuts, and cheese on hand as well, but they still do go for the ice cream because my husband and I are on different sides of the fence as far as what we give our grandkids. So he does have the stash in the freezer, and they know, they're well aware it's in there. So they will go for that too. And I try to not say much. I just try to lead by example and have things on hand for them to choose as well.
Mhm. Yep. So again, swaps are important, but I was a kid when I was a kid growing up, and a lot of it I'm learning to understand now as an adult. But I had a big aversion to texture more than taste. So if something
Mhm.
texture didn't work for me, I didn't eat it. Even if it tasted good, or on paper it should have tasted good, if was the wrong texture, it didn't matter. And that was a big thing. I was extremely picky growing up. And I understand that now as a sign of neurodivergence, but back then you didn't get it. No one got it.
Yeah.
So there was just a lot of shame and judgment that went around regarding me or my food choices. Um,
Hmm.
and so then I internalized that, right, and thought that this was something just, I was weird. But growing, finally as an adult now, I realized many, many, many millions of kids have issues around taste and texture, and
Yeah.
texture that one child loves, another child might hate, even if the food ingredients are the same, but the texture is different.
Hmm.
So again, thinking about all of those things, taking that into consideration, again, rewarding a child for noticing the way that they react to the food versus judging them for how they react is the big key. So it's the whole idea of not being so granular, right?
Hmm.
And again, thinking about how you can reward the child for exploring the palate, or
I love
exploring
that.
different single ingredient foods instead of, going to just the processed stuff. It depends on the child, it depends on where they live and what their exposure is and what their willingness is. But again, it's a slow process, I think,
Yeah.
to reward them for exploring and choosing differently. I remember when my niece was growing up, and granted, she has, this genetic marker really for the way that she processes protein. So for her, when, getting her to eat protein that she could have, in her case, a lot of times fish,
Mm.
was the very first kind of protein that she could have, and it was sort of, safe for her to eat. A 6-year-old does not like fish typically, right? Because it wasn't like, they weren't giving her fish sticks, right? It wasn't like there was some highly processed junk that she was
Mhm.
getting. So they had to reward her for at least trying a piece
Mm.
of fish.
Yeah.
My brother worked there because he saw what I went through growing up. My brother worked very patiently with his daughter,
Hmm.
trying to introduce foods and rewarding her for trying them, not forcing them on her. I was growing up forced to eat foods. Like I was the kid that got their liver left on the plate from the night before and had to finish it for breakfast if I wanted
Oh.
something out. Like it was sick, like crazy stuff that my dad chose to do. So it was really for my brother very important that he didn't put any restrictions or forcefulness around the kinds of food that she ate, because he knew that she had this genetic limitation uh
Hmm.
before there were meds to help her. So he made it where she was rewarded for her curiosity and her willingness instead of punished for her lack of.
I love that.
Mhm,
Smart.
mhm.
Smart. And you talked about texture. I'm going to touch on flavor a little bit. And we can do a lot of things to enhance flavor, right? Nobody's going to respond well to bland food, adults or children. And you can lean into things like the date sweetened chocolate chips that they have like three ingredients, or just using dates or bananas to sweeten recipes. I've created some things for my husband that he'll eat now. And, but you just can't underestimate the importance of flavor. And fresh herbs, spices, a sprinkle of cheese, or a drizzle of olive oil can really go a long way in making vegetables kind of come alive. And for example, I love my cauliflower crust pizzas. Have you ever tried those? Yeah, I think they're great. I and really once you add all the other seasonings and tomato sauce and toppings,
You don't
for
even
me,
notice.
I'm
Yeah.
very satisfied with that. You
Mhm.
don't like them?
No, no, I'm
Oh, you
saying
do?
it's a no-brainer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy. Do you ever try those swaps with, I guess your yourself or your kids and with success?
Yes, so when I first moved down here with the kids, back then I was still eating, vegan eating, and I would make all kinds of stuff that was swapped.
Hmm.
And sometimes we told them, and a couple of times we didn't. At my husband's choice, not mine. He knows his kids best. So if he thought it was, like, hey, don't tell them, see if they eat it. 99% of the time they ate it. His daughter asked us
Right.
one time, and we told her what it was. But it wasn't, again, it wasn't an attempt to deceive. It was just like, hey, it looks like it tastes like it, see what they think.
Yeah.
Other times, it kind of became this running joke, like my father-in-law and I have about, what are you making traditionally out of something that's a plant today? Like it was like, you know, I mean, he would just laugh, and he was a good sport because he's like
Hmm.
old school Midwest meat and potatoes guy. And
Hmm.
old school, like nothing is off the table, but it's all, you know, packaged processed meat, potatoes, everything in between. He jokes that he does not eat any vegetables. He does, but he jokes that he doesn't.
Hmm.
And so anyway, when I would come in eating nothing but vegetables, and I would make him all of these things out of different vegetables, including meat substitutes, or, like my, lentil loaf or whatever I was making back then,
By the way, love your lentil loaf. That's the best.
he would be a good sport and try them all. And the kids would too. So I can't really say, like Doug and I made, I can't remember what we made it out of, probably TVP or some kind of tofu. We made like a chicken, what's it called? Buffalo wing.
Yeah.
Well, it was cauliflower. It was cauliflower. We made it
Yeah.
out of cauliflower. And we, Doug said, I don't think that my son will know what these are. Like, I think we'll just pass them off as chicken. And I'm like, oh, whatever. Like, I'll follow your.
Great.
And yeah, Seth ate them and didn't even say anything about it. He said they were so amazing. I'm like, because really, as long as you sauce them with the same stuff,
Right.
serve them with the same
Right.
celery and all the dressings or whatever, you
Right.
know,
Yeah. It's good. It's really
and
good.
chicken has no flavor. I mean, let's be honest, there's no flavor. No one's ever like, this is the most flavorful chicken unless they're eating it inside of some sauce.
Right.
It just doesn't. So, let's shift gears a bit and talk about education. One of the things that's been really helpful is in teaching kids why certain foods are better for them. So it's the why is the important
Yeah.
thing here. It's not the what, but the why.
Hmm.
Don't just tell them eat this, it's healthy, right? That's where eating disorders begin, folks.
Yeah.
That's where eating disorders begin. So we talk instead about why it's good for their bodies, what it does for them. And
Hmm.
the same goes for the processed stuff.
Yeah.
For us, one of the biggest wins that we had with our daughter, who, when I first met her, was an early teenager, and now is growing up and almost getting ready to go to college. And so she has evolved in the last few years away from everything ultra processed and never really, caring
Nice.
for. She would eat veggies here and there, but never really caring for it on a regular basis and never really thinking about what she put in her body. And now she's very mindful because she
Mhm.
see, and I've said not a word. Her dad has a little bit, just to point out, like, hey, I noticed that you're complaining about how you feel. or you're really irritable, or you slept all afternoon after that pancake breakfast. Like
Right.
maybe it's connected. And so she's starting to
Mm-hmm.
see now that it's all connected. And she's
Mm-hmm.
starting to put those connections together. And she's starting to feel like, oh, it is how I feel is connected to the way I eat.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's starting to notice, for her age anyway, her friends all are concerned about acne. So now it's like, well, I don't want to get acne. And where we're noticing that some of her friends she's come to us asking questions. Oh, so and so has these bumps on her face that won't go away, and they're not pimples, and
Yeah.
what are they? These little girls are having allergic reactions, right,
Mm-hmm.
at their young age. And of course, they're going to dermatologists and they're spending all this money on topical stuff. And I'm like, you have an allergy to probably either dairy or gluten or some additive that's in your food. You need to get
Mm-hmm.
that crap out, and all of this will go away.
Mm-hmm.
They don't connect it. So unfortunately, I'd say for younger young women, vanity is a driver.
You found their currency.
Yep. For young men, performance is a driver.
Yeah.
Sports performance is a driver.
Mhm.
For my husband, his driver is energy, right?
Yeah.
He's worried about having no energy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a thing that'll make him change. For me, it used to be weight was my driver, and now just not feeling sick is my driver. So again, you got to find your why.
Yeah. No, I love that. And when kids start understanding the why, they start to see food as fuel and not just something that they have to eat to check off a box.
Right.
We talk a lot about how food can be fun, and it's also about understanding that food has a purpose.
Mhm.
And when they start seeing these benefits, like you talked about a little bit, the more energy, the better skin, a happier stomach, they'll naturally start leaning into those healthier options. But I think the real key is educating the parents. And then when you know better, you do better. And it's just a natural trickle down effect to the kids. My kids were all involved in athletics like your kids are, but we just didn't talk about it that much because I didn't fully understand it myself. And again, I go back to they were thin. So I'm like, I just didn't it wasn't up on my radar screen because they weren't, they were thin, which I'm not saying I'm not shaming myself about that, but it just is, I just didn't think about it. And I just am so much more aware now. And it now that I am on my own recovery journey, I just have more of the knowledge and understanding. And I wish I could go back and do it over. I can't. I can just do better moving forward with my grandkids. So that's where I
Mhm.
am in my life right now.
And again, it's all about balance, right? So no, none of us or any child is going to have perfect balance. First of all, any child is growing as they're growing up. Remember, a child's brain is not fully developed until their late teens and early 20s.
Yeah.
So the fact that we expect a child to make a choice that's, grounded in their frontal lobe and critical thinking is bananas. Like that's just not going to happen.
Unintended.
Yeah. So they're going to be swayed. They're going to be easily moved. They're going to be influenced, which is exactly why the marketing, machine of processed food companies works so well on children because they don't have
Yeah.
thinking skills. They see bright colors and fun voices and see
Right.
cartoons and they're in,
Voice.
right. That's it. It's visual and they're in. So
Mhm.
that's the key. So the kids they're monkey see, monkey do, right? Their brains
Mhm.
are not developed. Critical thinking skills are not developed. So if they see
Mhm.
children around them eating those foods, it is important to understand that they will eat them too.
Yeah.
They will be at a birthday party and they will have cake. They will eat crap that makes them feel like junk. They will do it again and
Mhm.
again because they see their friends doing it. And it
Yeah.
is not because they're bad kids or because they're, not making healthy choices. It's because their brains are not developed. So that is
Yeah.
why it's critical to not talk about making healthy choices. The child doesn't understand that. The child understands how they feel and
Yeah.
how it looks and feels to be either like their friends
Mhm.
or how they feel after they make those choices. So the sooner we can start
Yeah.
associating the feeling after the food, the better the
Mhm.
child will be. And then it's an empowerment instead of a outside coming in kind of shame thing.
Mhm. No, exactly. I love that. The no shame and just focus on education and
Mhm.
awareness. And it's all about finding that balance, like you said. And honestly, I think the more we talk openly about nutrition, the more it just becomes part of their daily routine. It becomes part of their vocabulary too. And we're creating these future food conscious individuals, not just kids who are told what to eat. So, let's talk for a minute about the struggles before we end here, because let's be real, this is not all smooth sailing. There's going to be pushback. Kids are going to protest when you try to change up their snacks and their meals. So, what do we do about that?
I mean, ideally, again, that's the whole idea that you reward the willingness and reward the trial, you reward the self-awareness, and you reward the connection to the way that they feel after the food. And again, I would say that there are getting them involved in showing them where the food comes from or how it's sourced
Ooh,
or
I
how
love that.
changed into different recipes, I think is
Mhm.
important, right? Like some children are, and remember, taste buds grow and mature as children do. So those strong vegetable tastes are not palatable for some young children at first. So exposure is important, right? Continuing to expose them. How about this? How about that? How about this way? And
Mhm.
get exposing them without shaming them. And if we can make positive associations to those recipes, positive associations to those ingredients or those foods that they would be averted to or have an aversion to, I think
Yeah.
is
Yeah. And you know what? The switching was a process for me too. When I started changing my life, and now you talked about taste buds changing, a handful of grapes are plenty sweet for me since I've been off sugar for almost, well, it'll be 4 years. It's 4 years this month. And so the big point is about making sure they don't feel like they're being punished by being forced into the healthy food box. And I think when you offer a variety of options, kids still feel like they have some choice in the matter. And for a lot of kids, the fun part is getting to be part of that decision-making process anyway.
I totally agree. So again, in recovery, it's important to have backup plans. If you know your kids are going to reject, something like a kale chip, have another option for them, right? Have another option. You've got to have those, easy options available. So again, you're not pushing, you're just making them available. These are the
Mhm.
two choices, right? There's no other go out and source your own, right? And it makes me crazy. We've heard Paige and I know an influencer out there in the space, and I totally agree with her. We hear moms say, oh, my kids have all this junk in the house. How old's your child? Thinking, driving age. They're like, oh, no, they're 7. Well, why? Who is the kid getting in your Honda and driving to
Yeah.
the store? No. Like, why are you buying this stuff for them?
Right.
So again, the problem is not the birthday parties per se, or the kid bringing it home from the birthday party. That's not but if it's everywhere in the house available and your child can't understand that with the way the impact the food has on them,
Yeah.
if they're
Yeah.
not able to connect it because that food is always available to them, it's going to be an uphill battle. And if you're the one responsible for bringing the food in the house, then again, it's all about rewarding, noticing how foods make them feel instead
Yeah.
of demonizing bad foods or saying, putting good foods in the sainthood category.
Yeah. Yeah, just stay relaxed about it, because if they don't like something today, it's okay. Maybe it's
Yep.
a texture issue, or they may just not be in the mood. Just keep trying, not forcing, just keep exposing. And I think this has been a great conversation today, because we've talked about creating a positive food environment, gradually introducing healthier options, and then empowering the kids with knowledge of why these foods are great for their body.
I agree. So again, you're not forcing, right? We're guiding our kids with love and understanding and asking questions and being curious. And again, just remember, it's about, what's the outcome, right? Not getting caught. How important is it? Not getting caught in the
Mhm.
mired down in the details, but looking at the big picture.
Yep, I agree. And do you have any time for listener questions or,
Yeah.
okay. Let's go ahead, and Jamie, you want to take the first one?
Yeah. Why do you think kids are so drawn to ultra processed foods, and what role does marketing? So we talked a little bit about this, right? We explained it a few minutes ago, or I did, talking about kids are withdrawn because their brains and taste buds are not fully developed. They cannot taste the nuanced flavors in vegetables. They taste some of the bitter or less palatable flavors in vegetables because their taste buds are not fully developed yet.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with the way that most moms are rewarded, new moms are rewarded to not breastfeed. They're rewarded to turn their children into formula babies. These children are developing a corn syrup sweet tooth at infancy. So if you have a corn syrup addict and a
Yeah.
processed packaged junk powder addict at infancy, trying to get that same child to eat broccoli by the age of 3 is probably going to be an uphill battle. So
Mhm.
again, it's important to remember that these flavors, these tastes are created by nature, and to start them off, if possible, with a palate that is as close to nature's, design as possible. I think you'd have an easier time. And if you can't, if that wasn't possible, to understand what you're working with and to reward them for the journey, not for the outcome.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly do this other one about what are some fun non-food rewards parents can use instead of treats to reinforce good behavior. We like going to the park or the science museum. My kids are good about taking their kids on a walk or a ride around on their bikes around the neighborhood, or maybe
Yeah.
it's a trip to the dollar store. You
Yeah.
can, it's $1.25 now, by the way, but my grandkids just love the dollar store, and they can get craft projects, paints, just fun pencils or paper. So there's a way to switch their thinking there about food
Huge.
reward
It's
to
huge.
other rewards.
Yep. I agree. Yep. My grandmother used it. Nature walks. She lived
Yes.
her property backed up to a man who had, farm animals. He had sort of a little farm that, and back then it was all farmland. So he had like a little farm with some animals, and I got to go and feed the animals, and that was like the best thing ever,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So
You can
think of
even make
those,
it a scavenger hunt, how many different things that you can find or colors or things like that.
yeah, lots of
It's the
ways.
same for us that we do in our recovery too, is find interesting ways to get involved in life. So food isn't our number one, right?
Yep, same thing applies.
Well, we hope that you've enjoyed this topic today. And if you want to find out more about us at Real Food Recovery, you can find us at realfoodrecovery4u.com. That's the number 4 and the letter U. And we hope to see you next time, guys. Thanks so much. Bye bye.
Take care.